Well, welcome. My name is Rick Deluca, and I'd like to welcome you to the 4 Weeks of Success. It's a program I've had for many years. The purpose of the program is pretty straightforward. The purpose of this program is for people that are either new into business, maybe they have experience. I've got people here I'm talking to today that are both very experienced and people that are relatively new. The market that we have today and the actual filming, the time that we're filming this, the market we have out there today is pretty tough. Yes or no? Yes. I mean, that's a tough market. This is the toughest one I've seen in a lot of years. And so, here's what is going to happen today. The purpose of this program. The purpose of this program and the folks that are watching this, this series, is this. In all the years I've been around, because I've been around the business over 30 years now, it seems to me one of the things that's missing in this industry to a great extent is what I call specific direction. We kind of come into this business and we're told, well, you got to go out and see people, and you got to talk real estate, and you got to mail them things, and you got to, call them, and you got to, and it's just not real specific. We're an industry that's known for not having a lot of specificity. Is that a fair statement, by the way? And it's pretty much kind of on your own. Here you got to go out and figure this thing out. Well, the program here that you're about ready to embark on are 4 DVDs. The idea is you watch one DVD each week for 4 weeks in a row. It's going to give you maybe about 2 or 3 hours a week of activities to do. And if you do those activities each week for 4 successive weeks, at the end of that 4-week period of time, you'll have some good, solid work habits that have been developed. I'm going to provide you very, very specific direction. And when I ask, here's an activity that I suggest you do, I'm going to give you very specific direction as to how I think you might want to go about doing that activity. And like any program, I would hope that you take these ideas and then you kind of blend them to fit your personality. Do them the way you want to do them. Say them the way you want to say them. I'm not one that's really hung up on these are the words you say. I've always had difficulty with that. Because early in my career, I think I kind of fell victim to that. And I was going to, well, here's the words I'm supposed to say. And I would say the words, but it wasn't me saying them. Are you with me on that? It was somebody else, coming out of my lips. And it just doesn't work real well. So I'm going to give you a real specific direction on this thing. And the idea is to give you some real good, solid work habits. Whether you're new or experienced, I think you'll be glad to hear. Now, the truth is, the market has changed so much in the last 24 months, in the U.S. at least, that a lot of us who've been in business 6, 7, 8 years, we've really not seen a market like this. Is that a fair statement, by the way? Yeah. We've not seen this, and so we're almost starting from scratch, some of us. So what might happen for some of you who actually watch this series is that you might pick up a new idea or two, but what I might do for you is remind you of things you used to do back when we had to do them. And so the frustration I see as I go all over the world, talking to people about, how we can be a little more productive, is that I see a lot of hard work in real estate, folks. A lot of hard work, hours and, energy and time and money we're expending. But what I see is a lot of frustration because a lot of people are using a lot of this energy and their time, and they're working harder and harder and harder, but they're doing the same activities we were doing 3 years and 4 years ago. And those activities worked in a certain kind of a market. They're not as effective in this kind of a market. And although we do more of those activities, it's not going to equal necessarily higher production. Do you follow what I just said? And so that caused a great deal of frustration for a lot of real estate people. I mean, for the most part, people I see all over North America as I travel are telling me they're working harder today than they've ever worked before to try to make at least the same amount of money, maybe even a little bit less. So it is a difficult market, and so I'm going to see if I can help you in that area. One of the primary purposes of this program, the 4 Weeks of Success, if in fact you follow these activities each week for 4 successive weeks, you will in fact have a feeling of accomplishment. You'll actually feel as if you're doing something, because one of the knocks on our industry is that it's difficult for us to judge and assess our progress and our success, because our success is almost exclusively deals with contracts, with closings and settlements. If we're not writing up deals, we have a feeling that we're not being very successful. Is that true? And so this program, if you do the activities that I suggest each week for the next 4 weeks, if nothing else, at the end of each week, when you put a check mark by those activities, you will in fact have some sense of accomplishment. Are you with me on that? And I think a lot of us could really use that, you know, because we don't want to measure our success exclusively by how many contracts we're doing. Contracts is really nothing more than a byproduct of daily activities. That's all it really is. And so that's the purpose of this program. We're going to home in on those activities, see if they can make sense. For a lot of us, this will be the first time that you're really introduced to using systems, a systematic approach to things. You'll see I'm very, very systematic, whether it's how I write notes, or you know, how I add people to my database, or how I make phone calls, or if I take a listing, or if I got a buyer in tow. It is, you know, step 1 through 7, or 1 through 11, or 1 through 5. I'm very, very system oriented. And the reason I became at an early age, so in the early stage of my career, the reason I became so systematic is because by nature I'm highly disorganized. Anybody relate to that, by the way? You know, and that's no false modesty. I'm very disorganized and always have been my adult life. And so what I discovered about real estate and about my personality is if you struggle with organization, you may end up going in so many different directions at the same time. Sometimes you're not even sure what direction you're going. Is that true? And so what I decided early on was that if I did an activity more than one time, then I felt I needed some kind of a system or a checklist for that activity, because what I realized, if I didn't have a system or a checklist for that activity, then every time I did that activity, I was reinventing it. And so that's kind of the backbone of you know, my career, you know, and how I developed the things I did and why I share it with them. So let's get into week 1. Let me kind of give you an idea what I think is the most important part of how to, you know, not launch a career. Some people watching this video, this is you're brand new. This is your first, here you go. But there's a lot of people that'll be watching this series that have been selling real estate, you know, some people for years. So we're going to kind of draw a line in the sand right here, and we're going to say this is week 1. And we're going to start right now as if we really don't know anything, and maybe some of us get rid of some habits that we developed during a real hot market, and let's talk about the things that will actually work in the kind of market we have here today. You see, when I launched my career, I was a young guy, and I go into real estate business. I had no business training background. I had just a real limited background. And all of a sudden, I'm in a real estate business, and I went to work for an independent broker. Just an independent broker, about 35, 40 people worked for him. And I was trying to get to know the people, trying to mesh with the folks in my office. And I would go out and tour in the caravans and look at the houses in the first couple, 2-3 weeks. And then we would typically go have lunch. And there were 7, 8, or 9 of us sitting around at one of the very first, probably the second or third week in the real estate business. And the top agent in the company, Joanne, she was sitting there kind of leading the discussion, and people were talking about all the things they do to generate success in the business. And they were talking about the advertising they did, and whatever they mailed, and the phone calls they made, and sitting open houses, and some of them were knocking on doors, and just all kinds of different activities. And you know, they got bus stop benches, and some had shopping carts, and just, I mean, it was just endless. And she got to me, and I'm the new kid on the block, and she said, well, what are you going to do to make it in the business? You know, because they had just taken 10, 15 minutes, everybody kind of sharing all the things they did. And I was overwhelmed, you know, and when they got to me, I said, you know, I don't really know exactly what I'm going to do, but I don't think I'm going to do most of those things. And it was just kind of a naive statement, all right, but she took offense to it, you know, as you can imagine. And she said, well, what do you mean you're not going to do those things? And I just didn't see myself, number one, with bus stop benches and shopping carts, and I didn't see myself advertising. Number one, I didn't have the money to advertise. Anybody relate to that, by the way? I couldn't be running lots of ads in a local newspaper and, you know, see if I could out-advertise other people. So I didn't really see myself going out there just knocking on a bunch of doors and picking out some neighborhood. And not that that's not a good idea. I just didn't see that for me, that's all. And so she said, well, how are you going to generate business then? If in fact you're not going to do these things that we're doing. You know, and I kind of felt on the spot. And that you know, that naive position I was in, it just continued to flow. You know, when I said, you know, well, I guess here's how I think I want to sell real estate. I just want people to recommend me. And she just looked at me and she said, well, who wouldn't want that? But then she said, how are you going to do that? How are you going to get people to recommend you? Because the magic question she asked to me was, she said, who are you? Why would people recommend you? And I didn't have an answer. And I was a little embarrassed, a little awkward. And so, we left the lunch. I went home, and I think I stayed there for like 3 days. What do I do now, And so I finally I took a couple, 2-3 days, true story. And I said, she really asked a great question. Why do people recommend you? I mean, there's got to be a reason people recommend you. And I sat down and over this 2-3 day period and I said, you know what? I think that's the key to whatever success I might have. You've got to intellectually understand why people do recommend you. And so I suggest, that you kind of go through what I went through and think about, why do people recommend anything to anybody? Forget real estate. Forget lending. Forget that. Why do people recommend a restaurant, a dog groomer, babysitter? Why do people recommend anything to anybody? I think it's for one reason. You see, I think there's one primary reason why people will recommend anything to anyone. And it sounds corny. It's a corny word, but I believe it with all my heart. And I believe they recommend us because they what? Because they trust us. That's why people recommend us. That's why they recommend a dog groomer, a hairstylist. And somebody goes somewhere, goes to the restaurant based on our recommendation. They get a bad meal and or a bad service, and I'm embarrassed. Is that true? I feel, gosh darn it, I recommend and they let me down. Well, we're not talking about dinner. We're not talking about getting your poodle trimmed. We're talking about selling somebody's house. A whole lot more serious than maybe having dinner. And so I said to myself, all right, how do I get people to trust me? How would I actually get people to trust me? And I think there's 2 reasons why people trust us. One, it's because of our character. Our character. Who we are as a person is why people recommend us. Is that a fair statement? Now, we're not going to, on this DVD series, this training program right here today, we're not going to learn how to develop character. I mean, your character is what you are. That's who you are. You learn that as you've been raised in life. As an industry, I think, my 3 decades around this industry, I think we do a pretty good job over here. Do we have some bad characters? Of course we do, but every industry has some bad characters. We do a good job. But as good a job as we do here, I think we do a horrible job on the other side. You see, character helps build trust. But you know what else builds trust in people? It's not just your character, it's also your competence. How competent are you at what you do? How good are you at what you do for a living? In the market conditions that we have right now, it's more important from the consumer's perspective than it's been in years to deal with someone who knows what the heck they're doing. Yes or no? We got to be brutally honest. 3-4 years ago, in most parts of the United States, because I got people watching this series from all over the world, but in the U.S. 3-4 years ago, the market was so hot in a lot of markets, it didn't even really make a lot of difference who they listed their home with. Is that all right if I say that? Yeah. It's the truth. Well, things have changed. All of a sudden, it's huge who they list their home with, who they want to work with, if they're a buyer. And so the message of competence is critical. So here's what it boiled down to. Once I came up with character and competence are the 2 factors that build trust in people, the question then became, for me, how do I convey a message of character and how do I convey a message of my competence? Some of the people watching this, and many people who watch this series, the single biggest obstacle you have preventing your initial success in your first year, 2 years in the business, is that the people within your life, the people that you know, the people that like you and they'd like to see you succeed, the obstacle you have is the same one I had 3 decades ago. And that is, in your first year or 2 in the business, the obstacle is they continue to see you in the capacity in which they had met you prior to your real estate career. Do you understand what I just said? And so we've got to change that. We've got to change this message of competence. So, bottom line, I believe that you convey your character through the personal actions that you take. The personal actions that you take conveys a message of your character, which helps build trust. Again, we do a pretty good job over here. So let's focus over on this side. How do you convey a message of your competence. It's not through the personal actions that you take. Rather, it's through the professional activities that you undertake. The professional things that you undertake conveys a message of competence, which begins to build more and more trust in people. And here's the final analysis. The more trust people have in you, the less risk they see in recommending you, thus they're more prone to do so. Yes or no? It's common sense. So, as we go into these first week's activities, I believe it's very important that we understand this. How do you build confidence in people? How do you convey a message of your competence? Well, I believe you've got to know the market statistically more than you've ever had to know it before. You have got to know the market like the back of your hand. And the reason why, if for no other reason, is that the consumer today is surrounded by real estate information from major news media. Is that true? True. And not always accurate, by the way. You have got to be able to have an intelligent conversation with people on what precisely is going on in the marketplace. So here, as we get into this first week, here's the activities I want you to begin to consider doing for yourself. I believe you need to know local statistics in your own market like you've never known them before. So, example, I think we need to know things like how many listings are on the market today versus 12 months ago. Do we have a lot more homes on the market? Has our inventory grown dramatically? We need to know things like the average list price and the average time to sell a home compared to the year before. I'm not trying to turn you into statisticians, but I am trying to convey a message to you that if you know a handful of statistics, you will have a tendency to use them in conversation with a consumer. And if you can use one or two statistics in a normal conversation with a consumer, if no other benefit, it would give you instant what? Credibility, which conveys a message of what? Competence. So we need to know those kinds of things. We need to know the list price versus sales price ratio. I don't know how you can price a home realistically today in the marketplace unless you can sit there in front of the seller and tell them this is what the average seller is discounting their asking price in order to make a sale today. And because multiple listing services vary all over North America, you need to make sure that the statistic you use in your MLS, if it has list price, sales price ratio, that the list price they use is the original list price, not the most recent list price just prior to the sale. If it's the most recent price, then you have to go back to get the original price and compute it yourself. I think we need to know that. How many sales has there been this year? What is the average price going on there today? Is the market going up and down in value? Those are the kinds of things you need to know. Now, I'm going to tell you in this first week, not only am I going to ask you to know these statistics, I'm also going to encourage you to do what I call a market study. You see, each week for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to suggest that you take a neighborhood, a subdivision, a tract, whatever your terminology is, and take that subdivision. Maybe it's 100 houses, maybe it's 150, somewhere in that kind of a range of size. I'm going to assign my agents to study that neighborhood for 1 week. And then the next week, another neighborhood, next week, another one, next week, another one. So each week now, for the next 4 weeks, you're going to see me suggest to you that you pick one neighborhood to do research in. It only take about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It's what I call the market study. And the market study is nothing more than I assign a neighborhood. Okay, there's a neighborhood you're assigned now, or you choose one. And you determine for that one neighborhood how many homes are in that neighborhood. You determine what's the age of that neighborhood. Is there new construction going on? Who the builders are, were the predominant home styles, the range in square footage, the recreational opportunities available, to that neighborhood, and then the school system. That's the kind of information you need to glean from the neighborhood. And then also, you need to find out real estate activity-wise, what's the average sales price for the last 6 months in that neighborhood? What is the average market time? How many homes are for sale today in that neighborhood? Who the top 3 listing agents are for that particular subdivision? And then finally, what is your overall impression of that entire neighborhood? Now, let me just stop for a second. If you, in fact, take this seriously and you study the statistics, those original statistics I said you need to know in your first week, and if you did one neighborhood each week for the next 4 weeks in a row, would you agree with me, if you did these activities, that at the end of 4 weeks, you would probably know more statistically about the marketplace locally than most agents know after 4 years? Yes or no? Yes. You virtually guarantee you'll know more than 95% of the people in your own market area, many of them with much more experience than perhaps you have. And so that's the purpose, that's the reason why I'm so big on statistics and why people should know their own local market. Don't let the buyers and sellers, the people, the consumers you deal with, don't let them gather exclusively their real estate knowledge based on major news media. Because I do travel all over the world doing these kind of programs, I will tell you, what I've learned about real estate, there is no national real estate market. There's none. And yet, from the major news media's perspective, there is a national market. Is that true? That's their position. And I've been in so many markets where it's hot in this market. Even today, in this one, you can't give away houses in another market. So you've got to know your own local market. Let's talk about your sphere of influence, your database, and it's what I called a target. Different terminology people use it. Some people call it a sphere of influence, center of influence. Some people call it just their database. Well, we all know, and I don't want to be too basic, even though it's a program to kind of launch people out there and get them going. We all know that we're supposed to have a database. And so when I was told that early in my career, I said, okay, I'll put together, and I had about 300 names and addresses. I had a pretty good size one because I had worked on a police department when I went in the real estate. And so when I went in the real estate, 95% of my database consisted of policemen and women that I worked with. And that was my database. Well, we all have to have a database. I'm going to make one comment and I'm going to move on because this is so basic. If you do not have a database, then effectively what you'll end up doing your first year in the real estate business over and over and over and over again because you're constantly looking for new people. If you have a database, you now have a target. And that's the most critical aspect of having a successful real estate career, having a target of some kind. So you've got to have, your database, whatever program you use, that's up to you. I'm going to give you one little tiny idea, and that is when you add people to your database, get into the habit of also entering into your database, into whatever system you use, along with their name and address and phone numbers, the obvious things. Also consider putting in there how you originally met them. What are the circumstances around your original meeting? So that when you call them down the road, 3 years, 5 years, or you're just having some kind of a conversation and you've got your record in front of you, you can make reference to, can you believe it's been 4 years ago last April that we met at that open house over there on Mark Twain? You understand what I just said to you? It's just a tiny idea that has huge impact on people to show them how well you know them, okay? Now, your database, as I said, your database is nothing more than a target. It's nothing more than a target, and that's how I think you need to look at it. This may be the most valuable thing you see in the entire 4 weeks, right here. What I'm going to share with you has changed people's careers who've been selling real estate for 10 or 15 years because they just simply never thought of it in the terms I'm going to express to you. You see, your database, using my analogy, is your target. And we all know what a target looks like. There's the target. There's your database. I had 300 people in my database when I launched my career. That's unusual. I think a real good database is about 100 people. 150 people. That's a real nice sized database. But I was taught as a young guy, and I'm part of that generation, that went into combat, was in a war and came back, and then I was a policeman for 7 years. And I had become, at a fairly early age, very, very what I call target-oriented. And so my entire adult life, if something is, if something is of a meaning to me, some people call them goals, some people call them objectives. I called it a target, all right? It became a target. That's the way my mind works. Well, you don't have to ever have fired a weapon of any kind to understand what I'm about to say to you. You're not taught to simply aim at a target. You're taught to aim at the what? At the bullseye. The most critical step to launching a successful career is 1, develop a target, your database. Two is to do something very few people do in this industry, and that is to identify who's in your bullseye by name. Mechanically, here's how I did it. I went through each one of my names, all 300 of them, one at a time, and I physically placed them in one of the circles in my target. And what I was looking for specifically were people who were in my what? Bullseye. Now here's my definition of a bullseye person. See if this makes sense to you. The bullseye people in your life are the people that they receive almost the same level of joy and satisfaction in your success as if they had achieved it themselves. Do you know who I'm talking about right now? You're talking a small number of people. You can probably count them on your fingers and your toes. If you're saying to yourself right now, well, you know what, yeah, I can think of this and this and this and this person. I think this one too. I'm not quite sure. Here's what I'm going to caution you. If you're not quite sure they're a bullseye person, they're what? Not. That's how blatant a bullseye person is. Well, I was very fortunate. I was very blessed. I had 17 people in my original bullseye. Everyone who's watching this series, everyone right here in this audience today, every audience I stand in front of anywhere in the world, for the most part, you have been gifted great people skills. That's part of the reason why you're in the business, and many of you do well. But for all the people skills we have, for all the creativity and all the things that we have going for us on one side of our brain, most of us are a bit deficient on the other side, and it's in this area. It's because we're not real organized. We're not real systematic. We're the kind of people that'll go out and create all kinds of new things, but we're not really known for then doing them real consistently. Is that all right if I say that? It's the nature of the beast, and accept who you are. That's who I am, and I accepted that. So, I'm going to try to move you towards being a bit more mechanical. And this is what I'm talking about. You see, at the center of my bullseye, right there in the center, was a lady I met my second month of my career. Her name was Betty. She was a waitress at a restaurant. She was 25 years older than me. Got her name and address that day, put her in my database, started mailing things to her, wrote her a couple notes that year, had lunch there a couple, 2-3 times during the year, and I got my first referral from her 14 months into my career. And sold them a little place, and then 2 years later, those same people bought something, the largest sale I made in my entire career, in my third year in the real estate business. And she became the most prolific source of real estate leads for me my entire 17 years I sold real estate. She was personally responsible for between 6 to 8 transactions a year. And she never bought a home from me in my entire career. She lived in apartments. That was her lifestyle. So here's what I want to share with you. This is how mechanical I became. On the first Monday of each calendar month, her name was Betty. I picked up the phone and I called Betty on the first Monday of every calendar month. The next person I called was Dwayne Eisenberg, my best friend. Then I called Tom Clark. Then I called Wayne Taglia. I can tell you to this day the people that I called. And I called them and I wrote some notes. I stopped by to visit them if ever appropriate. And I did these activities throughout the month. And then when I got to the end of the calendar month, I stopped wherever I was. And on the first Monday of the next month, I went back and I called who? Betty. And I called them, then Dwayne, and then my notes, my personal visits, and I got to the end of the calendar month and I stopped wherever I was. More often than not, I ran out a month before I got to the end of my target. You with me on this? But I made sure I covered the most important people. Is that very clear to you right here, what I'm doing? Now, that is a very basic way to work a database, to virtually guarantee that the most important people will hear from you every single month without fail, compared to what I've seen for years going all over the world talking to real estate people. This right here is how most real estate people work their database, right here. We're all over the board. The truth, we got to be brutally honest here. the truth of the matter is, it can be all of a sudden a month, 2 months, 3 months have gone by, and we realize we've had no personal communication with the most important people to us. Is that a fair statement? Yes. Because time flies by. So my message to you as we're going through this now is that we would be better served if we had some kind of a mechanism, a system that made sure that we had constant communication. Nevermore, this was the golden rule of my company, all my agents knew Rick's golden rule, and the golden rule was never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, do you allow more than 30 days to go by without personal communication between you and the people in your bullseye. And that's what it's all about. So you need to identify your bullseye. You need to have the names. You need to consciously recognize who your bullseye people are. I'm going to give you one. I'm beating this idea to death because it's huge. I'm going to give you one last comment. Let's pretend that you have 10 people in your bullseye. Psychologists tell us that the average adult knows 285 people. So picture, right here in front of you today, picture in your own mind your 10 people. Here they are. They're standing shoulder to shoulder. They're different heights and colors and sizes and shapes and ages and backgrounds. And there's your 10 people. Behind each one of your 10 people are standing how many? 285 people. If you do your job, if you work on, fine-tune, hone, whatever word you want to use, if you do your job and make that relationship stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger with your 10 people, they in turn have influence and access to the 285 people behind them, and that's where your business comes from. Does that make any sense to you? There's a huge misunderstanding in this industry that a lot of people think that their business comes from those people right here, from the standpoint of they buy and they sell. Their business should be a foregone conclusion. What you're after is not their business. You're after the business that they have access to. Does that make sense to you? But it won't happen unless you nurture that relationship with those most important people. You need to send them an introductory letter. For those of you who are new, you've got to lay this thing out. I provide the letter for you right in the workbook. You've got a workbook. You're following along with this DVD series right now. And use the letter. Massage it. Make it feel, your own. If you're new to the business, you want your introductory letter, that you're excited to be in this profession. And give them the rationale why you're excited. If you're experienced, some of us, quite frankly, we need to send the letter even if we're experienced. We've been doing this for years. But here's the truth. Here's the truth. Some of us have been so remiss in having continuing relationship with our most important people, we've got to send a letter that I call the please forgive me letter. Because we haven't had consistent contact. Is that all right if I say that? Yes. And so if you're watching this series right now and you're saying, man, this is like church, he's talking to me. All right? I've been selling real estate for 4 years and I haven't had any real constant communication, then you need to send a letter to your folks, and I provide the letter to you on what you might want to say as to why they haven't heard from you on a consistent basis. And then you make a commitment that they're going to hear from you on a more consistent basis from this point forward. Let me just very quickly, because I'm going to give you some activities to do here in a few minutes, but I want to give you the step-by-step how I did the things that I did and how I've taught for years. When you meet people and you try to get one name and address per day, which is, I think, a real healthy objective, the teller at the bank, the waiter at the restaurant, the guy, selling you tires, I don't care who it is. I try to get one name and address per day. I have a system on how I get people's names and addresses. And here's my system. Step one, I simply compliment the person. I just compliment them. You did a great job. You got a great personality. I bet the bank's glad you're working for them. Maybe it's something like, I hope I do as good a job, and my job is what, you did for me today. You did a great job. I compliment them. And then I tell them something like, you'd be great in my business. You say, I'm in a real estate business. I always make sure in the conversation, whenever possible, it comes up that I'm in a real estate business. Because what many of you have already discovered, even if you're real new in the business, when it comes up in a conversation, in a 30-second conversation with the waitress at the restaurant, that you're in a real estate business, they almost always say something about the real estate market. Is that true? Boy, I heard the market's in a tank. Hey, what's going on with interest rates? Hey, I tried to sell my house for 12 months, couldn't sell. I mean, they're going to say something about real estate 4 out of 5 times. When they do, then I use real estate statistics. I use real estate statistics right there in that conversation. Now understand, I'm talking a 30, 45-second conversation. So I don't, just rattle out all these stats. I give them 1 or 2 statistics. Well, as a matter of fact, the market is tough. It's the toughest we've seen in a long time. Example, last year, the average time to sell a home was 143 days. Today, it's taken us 165 days to sell a house. Last year, we had 7 months of inventory, 7 months worth of houses on the market. Today, we've got 9 months worth of houses on the market. I mean, just something about real estate. Because when I use 1 or 2 statistics, it gives me that what now? Credibility. It sends a message of confidence. I tell them I then have a special list of people. And here you're taking a little bit out of sequence here, but here's how it flows. You did a great job for me today. You got a great personality. I bet the bank's glad you're working for them. As a matter of fact, I'll be honest with you, we could use people like you, what I do for a living. I'm in a real estate business. The market, it is a tough market out there. As a matter of fact, last year it was this year is this. You know what? I got a special list of people that I send information to every single month. Just got a special list of people I just mail information to every single month. And if you'd like to be on a list, kind of local real estate information, what's going on, if you'd like to be on a list, I'd love to include you. Could you say that? Because you know what you're going to hear people say 65% of the time? 2/3 of the time, they say what? Put me on a list. You know the biggest advantage you have going for you in this business? People are fascinated by what you do. People are fascinated by real estate. And then I send them a handwritten note within 24 hours. That's my system. I simply send them a handwritten note. Hey, thanks again for the great service. Hey, enjoyed getting to know you. Look forward to sending information to you. And then I add them to my monthly mailing program. So that is a step-by-step system. That's how I did it. It might work for you. When I call people, because these things I'm going to tell you to do here in a few minutes. When I call people, I have steps to a phone call. I begin this way. When I call people I knew pretty well, I said to them, Dwayne Eisenberg, my best friend. Hey, Dwayne, it's Rick. Hey, listen, Dwayne, I'm calling you with my real estate hat on. It took me 5 years to discover that beginning of a phone conversation that made it so easy now to have a real estate conversation. One of the things I struggled with early in my career was calling people that I knew fairly well and having a real estate conversation because I was always sensitive that I might be violating our relationship. Anybody know what I'm talking about there? And so I had to come up with a way that I was comfortable with actually initiating a real estate conversation with people that I knew pretty well. And what I evolved to was this one right there, and that is, hey, I'm calling you, hey, Dwayne, I got my real estate hat on tonight. That granted me permission now to have just a short conversation about real estate. I began with whatever common ground we had. I always begin my phone conversations with common ground. Whatever we had in common, that's what I began with. And then I might start the call with the point of the call. I'm in the office right now. I've got an appointment in a couple minutes. I always said that so that one, I conveyed a message that I'm working. I'm in the office right now. 2, I built in an automatic termination device. I got an appointment in a couple minutes. Now, maybe the appointment is for my next phone call, but I had an appointment. It's important because some of the people we get engaged in phone conversations, it's difficult to get off the phone. Yes or no to that one? And so I built in a termination device. And then maybe the real point of the call was, hey, I've been working with a buyer for the last few weeks, can't find a house for this guy. So I'm just calling people I know, today. If you don't mind, take 30 seconds, tell you what he's looking for, just in case you happen to run into someone's got a home like that they're thinking of selling. And if that happened, would you mind giving him my name and number? Would you mind giving him my name or number? It's a very easy conversation to have. One that just flows. The total conversation takes about 90 seconds. And then I always end on the same common ground that I began with. That is my phone call right there. That's the nuts and bolts of my phone call. Again, my phone conversations usually took between 1.5 minutes and 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes at the most. Easy to get in and get out of a phone conversation. You've got to call people. The more experience you have, the more success you have, the more important it is to actually pick up the phone and call people. Because it's one of the first activities we quit doing. Would you accept that, by the way? And if you need to get out there and generate a deal, like in the next 10 days, there's no better way to do it than start working the phones. You just start calling people. And I virtually guarantee you call enough people, you'll get something going in the next 10 days. That's just the way it works. Handwritten personal notes. I have a system for handwritten notes. They're 3 to 5 lines long. They're short and to the point. I use a broad tip pen. I don't use fine point pens. I use a broad tip pen. Psychologists tell us that a broad tip pen has a more positive subliminal message to the reader than does a fine point pen. I'm talking about a little felt tip pen. Okay? It also takes up more space in your note card too, all right, which is a nice thing. And then I sign with a unique close. I try to do something a little different. I don't like signing notes sincerely or regards. I mean, everybody says that. Something a little bit different. And then I also put the date and time in my upper right-hand corner of my notes. I always put my time in my notes. Especially important if you write your notes early morning or early evening. So, 6:45 p.m., 7:35 a.m., it's a very subtle message that they're very, very what to you? Very important to you. So handwritten notes, the truth is, I'll just make the comment, and I think most of us accept, in this day and age, we're in a technology, era of our world, a handwritten note today has more impact than it's ever had before in the history of our country, yes or no? It's a lost art. It's a lost art. It's been replaced by what? Email. And I'm a huge proponent of email. But an email will never take the place of a handwritten note, ever. And then send a minimum number every day. And I think 10 notes a day is a real good number. That's what I did in my career, and that's what I'm going to suggest you do. So here we go. Let's just kind of cut to the chase. Here's our week 1 tasks. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do for the next 7 days. I believe you should take a day off. 5.5 days work week, that's plenty. But these are the kinds of things I think we should undertake. Number 1, I think it's healthy to be in the office at like a real job. I know people, work out of their houses. I understand that. But I got to tell you, it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to work out of your home. Is that all right if I say that? I think there's a lot to be said for just coming to work. Like, oh, I got to go to work. Remember those days when you had like a job? Well, this is a job. Selling real estate's a job. And I think you need to be in the office. I want you in the next week, I want you to expand your sphere by 10 people. That means a couple people a day, 5 days a week. That means that you go somewhere different for lunch every day. The teller at the bank. I mean, I don't care how it is. You get 10 more names. It's critical to your success. You need to memorize these statistics that I gave you and then use them in this first week. Find an opportunity to use those statistics. You need to complete your first market study of your first neighborhood. Maybe the manager's going to select it for you. Maybe you select it. That's up to you. And then I want you to preview 15 homes. If you're relatively new in the business, there's no replacement for knowledge by going out there and looking at the inventory. You've got to see the inventory. And 15 homes, that's got to go to the top of the list. I'd also like for you to listen to one CD, audio CD or DVD, or maybe maybe there's a streaming a download, some streaming video on an internet site, but expose yourself to more ideas. I want you to listen to one CD or DVD or something. Expose yourself to more and more real estate ideas. And then take a top agent to lunch. You may probably have someone in the office that's pretty successful. I think you take them to lunch. I give you the questions to ask them that's in your workbook. As a matter of fact, here's a tip. You offer to buy their lunch. All right? You take them to lunch and you pick their brain and you buy their lunch as a return favor. I want you to call 25 people in your database in this first week. 25 people. That's minimal. 25 people, and as I say, begin with your bullseye people. They're the easiest people to call, and I gave you a couple ideas on how you do that. I also want you to write some handwritten notes. I think 5 notes a day is a real good start. That's 25 notes in your first week. Because a lot of people have never had any experience writing notes. It's a totally foreign concept to them. So I want you to get into it maybe slowly, 25 people. I want you to have 100 names in your database by the end of the week. Put them together, get your Christmas card list. I don't care what it is people used to work with. You get together 100 names and addresses. And then finally, I want you to mail your introductory letter sometime during this first week. That is the assignment. Those are the tasks for your first week. It shouldn't take more than about 3 hours or so, 4 hours to do most of those activities. Previewing homes, that's kind of outside that time frame. But if you do those activities, at the end of the week, you will have a sense of accomplishment, yes or no? And I know you will.